All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Tequila Tuesday 33, I think. Had a lot of these now. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Super excited to have my friend Jeff Riseley here from the Sales Health Alliance, coming from cold, soon to be cold, Toronto, Canada. Jeff and I have been on a few panels together. I think we've been co-authors of a few different articles and blog posts and stuff like that as well. Jeff talks a lot about mental health, in particular in sales and taking care of sales and revenue community, which is something I care deeply about. And I know you guys all know my friend Richard Harris, who's big into this as well. And so the Sales Health Alliance, along with Uncrushed, the kind of organizations who are trying to support people and startups and sales, and Jeff's got a ton of resources and killer data he's going to share. And as always, we'll take everybody's questions. And yeah, we're here to help. And I'll turn it over to Jeff and let him do his thing. And if you got questions that you want to ask privately, DM me. Jeff's going to be sharing his screen. He's not going to be paying attention to the chat at all. So I'll be taking care of all that stuff for him. And off we go. So take it away, Jeff.
Sweet. Thanks for the intro, Scott. And it's nice to meet everyone. I don't know how many people I know on this call just yet, but yeah, I guess just to give you a little bit of background about myself, if you've listened to any podcasts, you might have heard portions of this before, or podcasts that I've been in. So yeah, so my name's Jeff. I started in sales just over 10 years ago now. Started in a classic boiler room type of sales environment. I was being measured on whether or not I could make 200 dials a day, achieve 2.5 hours of talk time. If you weren't hitting your metrics, you were let go pretty quickly. So it was a pretty intense environment to be in. And on the surface, I managed to do really well from an individual contributor standpoint, went on to be a top rep within the organization, winning all sorts of cool incentives and all that good stuff. But behind the scenes, I was not okay. I had really bad anxiety, I had insomnia, and I had panic attacks in the middle of the night. And it was after the third panic attack that put me in the hospital when I was like, well, this is no good. I should probably do something about this. So first thing I did, I went to see my doctor. He prescribed me some anxiety medication, which I tried for 2 to 3 months. And I really hated how it made me feel. I felt like I lost touch with my intuition and my emotions and the things I was relying on to be a top performer and really connect with buyers. I felt like I lost that. And going to therapy 10 years ago was still highly stigmatized. So I felt myself in this position where I'd found this career that I really enjoyed, something I wanted to continue to do. I love the growth, the rush you get when you close the big deal, the money that you could make. But I wanted to maintain a career in sales. I needed to figure out a way to make myself more resilient and manage the stress. So that's when I started taking on this personal mission. I was like, okay, what can I learn? I started reading everything I could about mental health, stress management, the neuroscience behind how the brain works. So that I started to kind of pick up little things over the next sort of 10 years that I started to implement into my day-to-day. And I wasn't really sharing this with anyone. Fast forward to July of 2018, I advanced to different sales leadership positions. In July of 2018, I was like, all right, it's time to start my own sales consulting business. And 3 days after I launched my website, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. So life threw me this like crazy curveball that I wasn't expecting. But was really, I guess what I'm grateful for the experience was the same strategies that I was using to take care of my mental health and sales, I naturally started to execute on during this next stressful period in my life. And again, while being an entrepreneur over the last couple of years. And that's when I really started to reflect on my career and everything I'd learned, and from like trying to find a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose. And I realized that look, like anxiety in sales is not optional. It's really part of everyday life. And when salespeople start to become anxious, depressed, and burnt out, their performance really starts to suffer. So how do we as a community, how do we as everyone that's taking time on the Tuesday night on this call, how do we start to change this perspective on mental health and sales so that we can start embracing it within our own organization and move away from the doom and gloom perspective of mental health and start to really embrace it as something that we need to take care of and prioritize on a daily basis to perform at a high level. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to dive into some of the slides that I've whipped together here. So give me a second while I share my screen. And all righty. So My hope through by the end of kind of this short presentation, it's going to be engaged. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions throughout. I'm hoping that, again, you walk away with, like I said, a better understanding of why this topic is important, but also what are some things that you can start doing to start actioning this, whether you're a sales leader, whether you're an individual contributor, really start understanding that this isn't something that is a nice to have. It's something that we need to have on a daily basis in terms of prioritizing the conversation. So like I said, what we need to do is we really need to start changing our perspective on mental health and what it means in sales. And when we do this, we can really start to see how it's really the key to helping us achieve all of our career goals and our bigger commission checks. And a good way to do this is to consider two simple questions that my good friend Tommy Short shared with me. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, highly recommend it. He's a mindset expert and former FIBA referee. He's amazing. But these questions are really going to help us get a better understanding of why this topic is so important and why mental health is really the key to helping us achieve peak levels of sales performance. So the first question is this: of all of the mistakes and errors that a typical salesperson makes in performance, what percentage of them would you say are mental mistakes? And for the purpose of this question, I want you to define a mental mistake as errors made in sales due to things like lack of confidence, composure, or focus. So things like a rep losing focus or messing up their pitch because they're not confident and nervous, or maybe forgetting to ask the right closing question because they're feeling anxious, burnt out, or they haven't slept well. What would you say? What percentage would you say? And Scott, if you don't mind just kind of reading out some of the answers that come in, that would be super helpful.
Yeah. Of all the mistakes and errors that a typical salesperson makes in performance, what percentage of them are mental mistakes? Brent Cole says 65%. Jessica Kite says 50%. Travis Gardner says 75%. Carolyn Dustin says 45%. Peter 75. Cynthia 50. Vicky
Nice.
40. So we're anywhere between 40 and 70.
Nice. Big range. Love it. And even if it was 10%, it would be important. And there's no right answer here in terms of my experience and kind of the conversations I've had with salespeople. Wow. It usually ranges 80 to 100%. Again, this is more of a little thought experiment to get our juices going. But really what's happened, especially right now, given that most of the selling is being done remotely and virtually, modern sales has really become primarily a mental game. So the second question, now that we've established that sales is really this mental game that we're working on, it's time to answer the second question, which is, of all of the training and coaching that a company provides their sales team, what percentage would you say is spent on mental training? So training and coaching around things like EQ, resilience, stress management, and mental health training, it's going to help salespeople level up their mental game and protect their minds while working under high levels of stress and pressure. What would you say? What percentage is invested into this type of training?
I'd say 20. Now that's a loose interpretation. A loose interpretation, because think about all the conversations about confidence, about being assertive, about proper tonality. So I'm going a bigger number, but I bet I'm going to be way wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the only one even close. The highest other number is 10%.
Yeah. Okay.
This is also potentially reflective of like the sales leader and what they focus on, because I talk about this shit all the time. So I'm probably like skewing my own guess.
Yeah, 100%. And I've if you kind of take
0 to 5.
If you take a look at the website and some of the sort of big software companies that I've worked with, you'd be surprised that this number always comes in around 0 to 5%, which is insane. It's a real eye opener for teams to be like, oh crap. So even if that person, whoever said that, mental mistakes only make up 40%, 45%, if we're not investing 0% into fixing that, that's a huge portion of sales performance, which is crazy. So this is really our huge problem on our path to selling at a high level and consistently wanting to hit our targets. What the sales industry is really failing to realize is that developing a high-performing team, whether it's in sales or sports or otherwise, it really requires us to develop 3 areas simultaneously. So first, you have your craft, so standard sales coaching and training and sales technology that's going to make salespeople more effective at quote-unquote selling. Then you have your mind, those things like resilience, EQ, and mental health training that's going to help protect the brain from stress and reduce the amount of those mental mistakes that are being made. And then finally, we have the body, which is the physical training and the nutrition that helps fend off the illnesses and keep them that keeps that mind healthy and working at a high level. And now, given that modern selling is primarily a mental game, the most important area that we want to focus on is the mind. But in my experience, 95% of organizations are investing almost 100% of their training budget and time into craft. And we're totally unaware about how important the mind is in terms of driving high performance and productivity. As an industry, we really have to start changing how we're perceiving our sales teams, how we're perceiving our people, how we're perceiving ourselves. We're not numbers on a dashboard or parts of the sales machine. Hell, we're not even really employees. Salespeople, in my opinion, are the corporate athletes of an organization that need to show up and perform in front of customers and compete to win every single day. So imagine for a second this analogy. What would happen if a sales leader coached LeBron James like most manage their sales rep? Let's say LeBron James expressed that he was feeling burnt out after playing back-to-back games. I know myself in my earlier days as a sales leader, before I really understood the importance of this topic, I would likely have responded in one of three ways. I might have said, "What's burnout, LeBron? That's not a real thing. Get back out there." I might have said, "Hey, LeBron, here are some new shoes that are going to help you run faster," aka typical sales technology. Or I might have said, "Hey, LeBron, let me teach you a better way to shoot so it's easier to score." Again, typical sales training and coaching that's really focused on developing the craft. Now, the problem is none of this would have been effective at helping LeBron manage his burnout, and led to major injury or changing teams or changing company. And in reality, proper coaches would show LeBron how to manage his burnout, teach him how he can rest and recover to return to peak performance as fast as possible by working with his mind and working with his body. But this is where modern sales is really broken. Sales has been and always will be this performance-driven sport, and we need to start treating ourselves like star athletes. And we need to start prioritizing these conversations within our teams and learning how to protect our mental health and protect our mind from the stressors that we're facing on a regular basis. Now, our failure to really treat ourselves like these corporate athletes and prioritize mental health, it's having very real consequences. If you do a Google search for mental health statistics, prior to the pandemic, most reputable mental health sources would have stated that in any given year, 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health problem or illness. Now, I conducted my own survey because I couldn't find any numbers specific to sales. And having lived and worked in sales for most of my career, I had this hypothesis that this number must be much, much higher. So in the survey that I conducted, which had almost 300 responses from salespeople, the survey really provided evidence to this hypothesis. And I found the mental health problem within sales was more than double the average population. I found that 43% of salespeople struggle with their mental health, which means over 2 in 5 salespeople are making more of those mental mistakes than they should be. And remember, this was pre-COVID. So more recently, Scott mentioned some of these companies earlier. More recently, I teamed up with Uncrushed, again, an amazing mental health organization, and Richard Harris from the Harris Consulting Group, another mental health advocate and sales leader in the space, talking about this stuff. And we ran this survey again to see what the impact COVID was having on the mental health of salespeople. And what we found was, and after collecting a whopping 770 responses from salespeople, we found that this problem just continues to get worse. Our data now shows that almost 3 in 5 salespeople are struggling with their mental health, with 58% rating their mental health as fair or poor. When we started to slice this more recent data by the types of sales roles, we found that salespeople working as account managers and account executives, as well as frontline sales managers, were struggling with their mental health the most. For salespeople and leaders working within these roles, more than 60% are struggling with their mental health, which again means that more than 3 in 5 of these groups are making more mental mistakes than they should be, which is this massive, massive number in an industry that really prides itself on peak performance. SDRs and BDRs were not far behind, with 57% rating their mental health as fair or poor. Now, the good news is that you can learn ways to improve your mental health. You can learn ways to manage your stressors, become more resilient, and experience, when we do this, we can experience these real boosts in performance when we're able to do so. So we found this really strong positive correlation between mental health and sales performance. The data showed that among salespeople with the best mental health, those who describe their mental health as very good or excellent, these salespeople were over 3 times more likely to rate their sales performance as very good or excellent compared to those with the worst mental health. So there's just really nice correlation that's showing as mental health improves, we're more likely to improve our sales performance as well.
Hey, Jeff, can I pause you here for a second?
Absolutely.
There are a couple of questions that have come in. One of them is really specific to what you were just talking about. Craig, do you want to ask your question? Can you get yourself off mute? There you go.
There we go. What I was asking is, what are we specifically counting as a mental health struggle?
Yeah, so mental health struggle in this case was rated anywhere from any poor or fair, so poor or fair on a 5-point scale. So it was poor, fair, good, very good, or excellent. And based on what we've seen is like that fair or poor, anything less than good was someone that could be performing at a higher level and was therefore struggling with their mental health. So that's usually the type of scale that's kind of used through other mental health surveys, is kind of measuring this type of approach.
Was this based on specific questions? Like, are we having difficulty in responding to people, or how was that?
Yeah, it was everything from sleep to being able, like how irritable are you on an ongoing basis, as well as basic questions like how would you just define and rate your mental health. The thing with mental health is really interesting, and I think where we have a lot of struggles with as a society is a lot of us don't realize that mental health is very similar to physical health, in the sense that there's a mental health spectrum and there's a physical health spectrum. And far too often, mental health, I feel, in our society is, when we think about mental health, it's being defined as mental illness, which only really applies to one end of that spectrum, of those types of people who are struggling the most. And what we're trying to focus on here is, based off of where all these salespeople are really perceiving themselves, where they're falling on this mental health spectrum, how are they then rating their sales performance? They have those metrics, but very few of us are aware of where we're falling on this mental health spectrum. So we're trying to find this correlation between sales performance and mental health. And two, what we're going to get into next, what are the various needs that salespeople say they need to not only feel better, but also perform better? So that's what we're going to dive into next. I hope that answers your question, Craig.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Jeff, can I pause you here for a couple more questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Cynthia, you had a question. This is going back a few minutes in Jeff's conversation and his slides, but do you want to ask your question? Can you take yourself off mute?
Yeah, guys. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah,
ahead.
I'm just saying, how do you, what if, how do you communicate this? Like, how can you manage your help if they're not even thinking about it, and they're not necessarily prepared to help you? They don't know necessarily how to, other than to send you to, I think every company usually has one of those like ERP, like go call that number and ask them for help. But, some people may or may not do that. And that may not give you kind of the immediate relief, or at least acknowledgement of the problem to start with. Any suggestions there?
About what they can do?
Yeah, well, what do you do if you're not really supported by leadership? Because I agree with you. I think mental health before the pandemic was something that I know I have personally suffered with insomnia. Thinking about deals, you just can't shut it off for years on and off. And so I just dealt with it because it's just what it is. And then after the pandemic, things are so crazy, right? Everybody started to acknowledge that the fear of dying and the whole craziness of the last year and a half added to that, and how difficult business has become. And I don't think a lot of managers or companies are prepared to really acknowledge it and do anything. Or maybe I'm wrong. You would know better.
No, honestly, you are 100% right. Like it's been an incredible uphill battle to, even with COVID, to get to this point. Like I think COVID has really lit a match where organizations are seeing that, oh, like shit, we can't just sweep burnout under the rug. We can't sweep this away. Like we're seeing really like the real impacts on our teams. And unfortunately, one of the things that I've heard most is from kind of the sales leaders that reach out to me during the pandemic. Their first line is usually, I've been feeling burnt out, and I know if I'm feeling it, then my team must be feeling it, which is really shitty that we have to get to that, that we have to get to that point where the leader has to feel it before they want to do something about it. And the really challenging part about that is, if we go back to this slide here, if you look at kind of sales leadership and the executives, again, this was April of 2021, 42%, they were the ones that were doing essentially the best out of sales organizations. So all the people in the front lines were burning out and struggling. And when it finally got to someone at the top, now they're starting to prioritize it. So this is a brand new conversation. I really feel like we're on the forefront of this the forefront of this conversation really being embraced within our teams going forward. But if you bear with me, we're going to dive into some of the needs and some of the other cool things that we tackled in the survey that might help kind of answer your question a little bit more.
Awesome, thanks.
Can I sneak in one more question, Jeff? I know I'm
Yeah, go for it.
punching in and out, but it's, you know, people have questions here. Jacqueline.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks, Jeff. Nice to meet you. I'm going to just be completely honest here and ask, have you taken into consideration performance-enhancing drugs? Because most of the people that I come into circles with and at every single sales job, Adderall has been a very prevalent drug. And obviously that leads to ups and downs, people's moods, insomnia. And I know that obviously like there's HIPAA laws and you can't like discuss this, but I just want to know if like when you are doing these assessments, if you took into consideration, have people been now apt to take prescription pills to do their job better or to stay on, you know, be a high performer and chase that rush? I just was curious if that was ever taken into consideration.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to be honest, I haven't explored that. I haven't looked into that specifically. I think one of the biggest issues, this I would maybe ties into this question a little bit, is the thing with sales is the way a lot of sales organizations pre-pandemic, and I'm curious if we're going to kind of default back into this kind of field, is I've always said that their default mental health strategy is having a really fun drinking culture, is the way that they're addressing mental health at scale. And it's really challenging because think about myself as when I was a brand new salesperson, like I said, 11 years ago now, entering these crazy environments that you'd be really high highs to really low low, to feeling like you're a failure, to feeling like you're the best in the world. By the end of those days, I would leave those days and I would be buzzing. I'd have no idea what I was feeling. I just felt like my emotions were totally bundled together. And the answer to that was put in front of me was, hey, let's go out and have drinks and get like blackout drunk or party to the wee hours of the morning. Like that's kind of like the answer that was being put in front of us. And that's the problem that we have within society is if you think about difficult emotions, like maybe we face a little bit of heartbreak, or we face a little bit of stress in university or school and before an exam. But sales is this really, really different beast. And we're totally unprepared for the emotional roller coaster that we go through. And none of us have really developed the emotional literacy that we need to really pull apart these emotions, to be equipped to tackle these really scary and really vulnerable emotions on a daily basis. So long story short, I haven't long-winded way of saying, no, I haven't looked into performance enhancing. I know cocaine is a huge issue as well within a lot of sales cultures. But yeah, I haven't looked into it. So it's the data wouldn't kind of represent that here, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments on
Go ahead, Jeff. I'll let you do your thing for a little bit and we'll stack a couple questions.
Yeah, sounds good. So from this data, what was starting to become pretty clear is there's this growing mental health problem within sales, and working to improve, and we really want to work to improve our mental health within our teams and improve performance, especially with all this data coming out around the pandemic and mental health. But the question is, where do we even start? So part of the survey really helped capture this. So over the last 10 years, while I was, like I said, working on my own mental health journey, I was reading countless books, podcasts, reading research papers, trying to dive into everything that I possibly could around resilience, peak performance, motivation, mental health, stress, and the neuroscience really surrounding these topics. And from there, what I started to do was really start compiling a list of needs that we as humans need to not only perform our best, but stay motivated and feel our best while working under these stressful situations. So some of these needs that we looked at are the following. So first, autonomy. We need to have control over the work that we do, how we do it, and how we manage our lives inside and outside of the workplace. Then there's this idea of strengths, and we have this strong need. We need to be using our strengths on a regular basis. And when we feel like we have the strengths to complete a task, we're more likely to be resilient to adversity and push through on those times when we feel like we're being held back a bit. Our goals need to be achievable. So this really talks to sales targets being achievable. And when we feel goals are challenging yet achievable, we're really motivated. When we perceive them as unachievable, we're more susceptible to stress, and we lose hope and we give up more easily. Then we have job security. Feeling safe in our role allows us to take risks. It allows us to learn from failure and explore different opportunities and do our best work on a daily basis. Then we have financial security. So financial security is really important because when we're able to afford basic needs like food and shelter, and we limit that feeling of living paycheck to paycheck and being able to pay our bills without worrying too much about it, we can reduce our overall stress and put all of our attention into our day-to-day work, which again helps us perform a little better. Then there's strong boundaries. When we have these strong boundaries between work and play, we can effectively manage our stress and recover from stress more effectively. Meaning and purpose is a really, really big one. When work is meaningful and we're emotionally connected to our work, we're more likely to push through when we do face this adversity. Then there's connection. We as human beings, we're programmed to be social creatures. It's how we've survived and how we've thrived for thousands of years. And when we feel connected to each other and part of a tribe, we feel supported and more comfortable during these uncomfortable times. Then there's leader support. So we need to feel leader support. There's countless data showing that when our leader supports us, it's one of the most important bonds within the workplace. So they can help provide us with that emotional support and give us direction and vision and help us find answers when we can't find them ourselves. Then there's company vision. We need to believe in the vision and the direction that our company is going. With no vision, we lose sight of the purpose behind that daily sales grind. What's the point of all of it if we don't believe in where the company is going? Part of this is recognition, similar to company vision. If you aren't being recognized by your peers or your leaders, it's easy to start thinking, what the hell is the point of putting myself in these stressful situations if no one even notices? What's the point of dealing with this insomnia or these panic attacks if no one really pays attention? Then there's career path. If we don't see a way to advance our own careers, we start to feel helpless and we want to give up and we want to quit. And then finally, the last one is vulnerability. Sales is freaking hard and is really stressful. If we're unable to really be vulnerable and express how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis, if those internal thoughts and those feelings and those emotions and those sensations, they're really going to start to tear us apart. So I'm curious, if I were to ask you, out of all of these needs, which ones would you say are not really being met within sales on a regular basis? What would you say?
I'll try to read off some of the comments here. Summarize it one more time for people who.
So we got autonomy. Yeah. So autonomy, you need to be in control of your role. Strengths, you need to be able to use your strengths on a daily basis or feel like you have the strengths to do your job well. Have achievable goals, achievable sales targets. Job security, you're able to take risks and step outside your comfort zone.
Almost predictably to me, basically every bullet point is being messaged. Boundaries, connection, vulnerability, career path, recognition, job security, financial security, leadership support, and then we start to get into a little bit of repetition.
Yeah.
Oddly to me, autonomy was not listed, and that's the one that I focus on. It's like if you're a sales rep, like you're not really working for yourself at all.
All right.
You're serving many masters, are you not? But
Well,
nobody wrote that. But now Peter's trying to be a smartass. Good try, Peter.
Well, get ready for this, Scott. Here we go. So this is what the 770 responses from the survey found. So we ended up asking about all 13 of these needs, and we found out what needs were being met and not met. So the top needs that were not being met by salespeople are vulnerability, career pathing, strong boundaries, achievable targets, feeling that meaning and that purpose. And of these top 5 needs, 1 in 3 salespeople or more do not feel like these needs are being met, which is just crazy. And what's also really interesting is that if you take a look at those things around autonomy and strengths, those needs are clearly being met by salespeople. And this is likely speaking to the fact that we've had more control than ever before in our day-to-day with being able to work from home, have more control of the meetings that we're taking. And then the countless hours that we talked about at the very beginning of investing thousands of dollars and hours of time into developing craft has given salespeople the strength that they feel like they need to do their job on a daily basis, which is really interesting. So when Richard saw this, he was like, well, I'm going to be out of a job soon if if these are the needs that are not being met and not met. So again, all of these needs really tie into performance, but let's really start taking a look at sort of the top three here. So across every single need, there was a very strong positive correlation between mental health and sales performance. So this means the more salespeople agreed that that need was being met, the better they rated their mental health and their performance. So if we look at the top one here, we're going to start looking at vulnerability. So what this is showing you here is among salespeople who strongly agreed that they felt like they could be open and vulnerable with how they were feeling at work, 69% rated their mental health as good or better. When salespeople strongly disagreed that this need was being met, only 18% rated their mental health as good or better, which is crazy. So therefore, salespeople who feel like they can be open and vulnerable at work are over 3.5 times more likely to rate their mental health as good or better compared to those who are unable to be vulnerable at work. When we started to look at this from a sales performance standpoint, we also saw this really nice correlation between the two among salespeople who strongly agreed that they could be open and vulnerable with how they were feeling at work. 90% rated their sales performance are good or better. But the most important area that we want to focus on this graph is the dark green blocks. This is the percentage of salespeople who rated their sales performance as excellent or the best it possibly could be. It was rated the highest on the chart. And salespeople who felt like they could be vulnerable at work were over 3 times more likely to rate their sales performance as excellent compared to those who felt less comfortable being open with how they were feeling. So from these two slides, we see this significant benefit and the impact that we're seeing on sales performance well-being when we start to really build cultures that embrace vulnerability and meet this need. When we started looking at career pathing among salespeople who strongly agreed that they felt like they had clarity and direction in their career path, 82% rated their mental health as good or better. When salespeople strongly disagreed that this need was being met, only 15% rated their mental health as good or better. So therefore, again, salespeople who feel and see this strong direction in their career path are over 5 times more likely to rate their mental health as good or better compared to those who feel stuck in their role. Something that is extremely common. I see this happen all the time in top heavy software organizations. I won't mention any names, but they're really nice brands, the big brands. They're attracting a lot of top talent, but rarely have enough advancement opportunities to provide to these high quality people that are looking to advance. It just gets really top heavy, and this having a direct impact on mental health. Here we see again a very similar story that we saw between vulnerability and sales, but this time within career pathing. Among salespeople who feel strongly that they have direction and clarity in their career, 94% rated their sales performance as good or better. And again, we want to specifically focus on these dark green blocks. Remember, these are the ones focused on peak sales performance. And what we see is salespeople who have direction in their career are over 3 times more likely to rate their sales performance as excellent compared to those who have less direction and less clarity in how they advance forward. So just think about how much better a salesperson would perform on a daily basis if a small change took place, if their leader spent more time having more frequent career pathing conversations, filling this need, being more transparent, creating new opportunities to advance their career. This is just something so basic that any sales leader can start doing tomorrow to start having more of these career pathing conversations. It's going to have a big impact. Now, finally, we have boundaries. This one should be pretty self-explanatory, but among salespeople who strongly agreed that they felt like they had strong boundaries with work, 79% rated their mental health as good or better. And when salespeople strongly disagreed that this need was being met, only 19% rated their mental health as good or better. So therefore, salespeople who are able to enforce these strong boundaries at work are 4 times more likely to rate their mental health as good or better compared to those who feel no boundaries and really struggle with separating those two areas of their life. Now, I saved this slide for the last one. My hope is that this last slide is going to help all of you kind of spark these conversations internally and put the nail in the coffin of this ridiculous burnout culture and hustle culture that is so rampant in sales today. It drives me absolutely mental. Look how crazy this is. Among salespeople who strongly agreed that they felt like they had strong boundaries with work, almost 100% of them rated their performance as good or better. That's just simply insane. When we look at top performers again, this dark green box, what we see is 45% of salespeople rated their performances, 45% rated their sales performance as excellent. So this was over 4 times higher than salespeople who felt less able to enforce these strong boundaries of work. Like, what would happen to you as an individual contributor or a leader or sales organization if you're able to 4x your sales performance by simply working less and creating time to help your body rest and recover from stress by building these stronger boundaries on a regular basis? It's just insane. So before we open this up to some questions and some answers, it's really important to close with this. Sales right now, I hope some of this data can help kind of paint this picture that sales is just fundamentally broken. It's why these stats from places like Salesforce that talk about 57% of salespeople are expected to miss their target. I think that was like 3 years ago, and it's like way higher now. But the reason why this is we're all approaching mental health, performance, motivation, and stress management as a sales community in the wrong way, and it's not really working. While we're spinning our tires in the mud, investing into the same old sales training and coaching, we're offering these random wellness days left, right, and center. Things are just going to continue to get worse. Supporting better mental health and sales, it doesn't need to be hard. It doesn't need to be scary. It really just requires us to change and be willing to try something new, because this is legitimately the greatest opportunity every single person on this call, every single company has right now that everyone is totally missing. So I hope this has kind of inspired some conversations, some things to talk about, but I'd love to kind of just open it up. And even before we get into some questions, what resonated with you from this conversation? What were some takeaways for yourself?
I'll go first and I'll give people time to chime in the chat, and I'll get to them. But can you go back to the slide, Jeff, where you broke down reporting mental health like by role?
Yeah. All right. So the most efficient way for me to do this is click it all the way.
No, I think we just passed it, maybe. There you go. So there's something that stood out to me here, and I'm going to just eliminate customer success, which is a whole just different beast to me. But the sales leadership and sales executive had the best score, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So why do we think that is? This struck me as like fairly surprising, and it makes me think that people are just fucking flat out lying, to be honest with you. Because I think everybody knows that the shortest tenure is the VP of the sales role. This is a sales leadership role. It's down to like 15 to 16 months on average, down from 18 months, which is the number everybody likes to quote from a couple of years ago. 15, 16 months, barely over a year. Basically, you got 2 like sales cycles if you got a 6-month sales cycle to get it right, or you're gone. So it's interesting to me that sales leaders report the best level of mental health, and I'm wondering if you have any theories behind that.
Yeah. So again, I know this is the best mental health, but it's still 42%. So more than 2 in 5. So
I'm
that's
trying to
like,
focus on the positive.
Yeah. No, so there's more than 2 in 5, but which is not great at all. What I will say to that is there's these very famous Whitehall studies that have been done. They're called the Whitehall studies. If you've read any books, I think it's called any kind of Simon Sinek book around kind of Leaders Lead Last, or Happiness Advantage, by Sean Aker. They kind of talk about these studies, and they're these really well-known studies that talk about how it really comes down to control. It's less about when people are feeling stressed and feel stress, it's less about the demand and the pressure of the role. It's more about the control that they feel in their day-to-day. That's what those studies found, is when people have more control over their role in their day-to-day, they're better able to manage their stressors and manage that pressure more effectively, versus someone that has hit your 50 dials, send this many, do X, Y, and Z. So I think that's part of it. That would be my comment to that, would be it's really coming down to the more you advance, the more control you have over your day-to-day. It's interesting that, to your point, that I would kind of counter myself on this, is that it looked like control was being met as a need by most salespeople. It's kind of, if we looked at that other data. So I don't know. There's some theories there, some speculation, but I really feel like it comes down to the control, but also being removed from some of those constant stressors of feeling like a failure, the rejection, some of those things that are hitting salespeople on a daily basis is what I'd say. But again, I don't have an accurate answer to that.
I mean, I can tell you as a sales leader that every day that I drove home and my team didn't have a good day, I 1000% felt like a failure because my team didn't perform. So but maybe the difference is like nobody was sort of reminding me of it every single day. I think a lot of reps are reminded every single day by their sales leader that they sucked that day. And maybe that's not as often the case with sales leaders, but I put so much of that pressure upon myself. I like 1000% drove home feeling like I'm fucking useless. How do I even have this job? I have no idea how we're ever going to close deals ever again, and I don't know what to do. Like that's a normal dialogue in my head as I'm driving home, like stuck in rush hour traffic. You know?
Yeah, but you bring up a good point about dashboards and micromanagement. Like you are consistently seeing I know there are kind of team dashboards and there's some good leader dashboards, but it's not nearly as prevalent as in the face as like you're on a team of 10 people or like a specific organization, you're at the bottom of 50 people or at the bottom of 10 people. And this is like constantly in your face about how far behind you are. Like, I don't think that's on an individual versus I feel like from a leader position, it's more at a team level. You feel responsible for the team, but it's not like I fucking suck as a human being kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I don't know. This is why it's more data, more conversations are needed.
I'll ask one more question and then I'll turn it over to the group. Can you talk about some of the more creative solutions that kind of, I want to use this phrase, but I'm going to use it anyways, kind of cutting edge organizations and leaders are implementing?
To be like, they're not. That's the tough part. Like I think the most cutting edge, cutting edge solutions that are being made right now are, you see this now, is like you have a lot of people defaulting to wellness days or summer vacations is kind of like the hot topics, the hot terms that are being used. But fundamentally, there's like a couple things wrong. I have like big issues with wellness days. So one, a wellness day is a very reactive strategy. So what that means is you're essentially acknowledging that your team is so burnt out that you need to give them a day off. So you're waiting to the point, if you think about this mental health spectrum, you're waiting until they're all the way down at, I guess on the screen, it'd be down at the bottom before you're saying, okay, let's offload a bunch of stress and give people a day off to recover. That's problem number one. Problem number two is when you offer someone a wellness day, you're assuming that they know what to do. You're assuming that they
know how to spend that day.
They know how to spend that day resting, recovering. They know how, what they need, whether it's journaling, whether it's going to see their therapist, whether it's just playing with their dog or doing something fun with their kids or doing an activity that brings them joy. You're assuming that they know what to do and what they need in that situation. And three, the last issue with the wellness day is that you're assuming that the people that you're giving a wellness day to want to use that day to come back to perform better for your company. They're assuming that people are deeply connected to their work versus, I know in my day, when I would have a day off, I'd be like, oh my God, let's go out and party and like have a ton of fun. Like that would be my use of that wellness day, if I'm being totally honest. And there's hundreds and thousands of salespeople that do the same thing, where we would just use that team to invest in bad habits and things that are not necessarily going to help us recover. And we might show up worse than when we took the day. So that is my issue with these wellness days, is it's like, yes, we're trying to offload stress all at once, but leading up into that point, those days, the weeks, the months leading up to that wellness day, teams are already struggling. Those mental mistakes are ramping up. All of these things are happening across every single person in your organization that we need to start getting better at a micro level, equipping people with like I said, the resilience, the mental health strategies, so that we can start to navigate these stressors in a mentally healthy way together.
All right, let's go to John Stern.
Shall I take my screen off, screen share?
Up to you.
Leave it up?
Up to
I'll
you.
pop it up so I can see everyone's face.
Go ahead, John.
Cool. Thanks for having me. A lot of us, I think Scott just mentioned it a minute ago, kind of push ourselves harder than anyone else would push us. And it's particularly in sales, each month you start over, each quarter you start over, each year you start over. You constantly have to, be proving yourself, not to mention different expectations from, the C-suite or the board or whoever else, is giving you a number. How can you reconcile, being able to pump yourself up enough to be able to constantly exceed numbers when there's never enough, no matter what you do. Even if you hit your numbers or exceed them, the next quarter they want you to double that or whatever. How do you ever kind of find what is enough, or so that you can be satisfied and kind of either give yourself a break or take the foot off the gas or anything like that? Because I know a lot of us are 0 to 100 and there's no real in between.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to answer that question. I think kind of the main thing is this look, if you're working more than 40 hours a week, 45 hours, if you're working that 50 plus mark, 60 plus mark, legitimately, no science will tell you that you are going to be performing at your best. And you're going to be misleading yourself. When you're sleep deprived, you're going to be making more of these mistakes. So an individual, we saw some of that data around boundaries. It's really important at an individual level to start structuring your day to have those strong boundaries. Something that I do really well is, or something that I kind of really tell people to do that's really helped me as just an entrepreneur, is having a really strong startup routine and a really strong shutdown routine. So a set of self-care activities that help you get prepped for your day, whether it's a cold shower, getting a workout in, doing a morning meditation, going for a walk outside, whatever that may be for yourself. Do a set of a startup routine, and then just have a shutdown routine specifically around self-care, whether it's practicing some gratitude, maybe it's taking your dog for a walk, calling your best friend, doing certain things that you can do on a daily basis to help you offload that stress on a daily basis rather than waiting till you're really burnt out. The other thing that I would highly recommend is investing into yourself. So I wear something called a Whoop. I don't know if you've heard about a Whoop, but a Whoop has been a total game changer for myself in terms
What
of—
is it, Jeff?
It's called a Whoop.
Well, what is it?
It's essentially a Fitbit on steroids. So it's it'll tell you essentially, it's going to measure things like your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate, your respiratory rate, and using these different metrics on a daily basis, it's going to help you manage and tell you, oh, this is what time you should go to bed. Here's how much strain your body can be under, both physically and mentally throughout the day. And as you go about your day, it's going to make recommendations in terms of how you can show up more recovered the next day. So for example, today, I woke up and my Whoop showed me that I was at a 56%. This is just raw data based on my metrics. I knew that I was having a late presentation today with the group here. So I made adjustments throughout my day. I got a nap in the late afternoon to make sure I was ready. And it's having really actionable data like this that helps me manage my day on a day-to-day basis to know how close I'm going to that burnout zone and making adjustments along the way. I think those are some main things you can do at an individual level. The other thing I would just kind of speak to is just there's a very Tommy Short, the guy I mentioned a few times, one of his favorite lines is so what, now what can you control, is something that he always talks about, is really getting back to focusing on the things that you can control on a daily basis. And you can always control investing into those stronger boundaries, investing into your mental health, investing into things that will help you become more aware of where you are on a daily basis to help you make actionable changes going forward.
All right.
If you're
Go ahead, John. Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if let's say that you're at a place that you're trying to set your own boundaries, hey, I'm not going to necessarily get back to the CEO within 5 minutes on the weekends or whatever, and they're constantly kind of tiptoeing on your boundaries or whatever. What do you recommend, aside from just leaving the place, to try and help them respect those boundaries?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a really challenging situation to approach. If I were you, I'd start small. It's always risky going head to head with a CEO or going head to head with your manager. Something I always recommend is you really want to start to have these conversations with an ally or two. And one of the best ways you can do that is starting by, if you're in a Slack channel, taking one of the articles from the Sales Health Alliance, for example, or taking some of the data from the mental health and sales report that's kind of shown here, and just dropping it into a Slack channel and say, hey, like I read this really interesting article around mental health. Here's some of the data around what's saying. What do you think? And see how that's responded in a Slack channel, whether it's an HR person that comes up, whether it's another sales person on your team, maybe your manager chimes in, but then you can start having those micro conversations and start finding your allies of who responded positively to say, hey, like, why don't we do something as a group here? Why don't we start bringing this up? To your point, I don't think it's going to be, if your CEO is on your back, it's going to be very hard to, from day one, turn around and say, hey, I'm having strong boundaries, I'm not responding to anymore. It's kind of going to be more of a work in progress. But this is where I'd start working at sort of getting that grassroots approach, finding your allies internally by sharing some really relevant data to see who also responds to it positively. And that seems to be working well with some of the clients that I've worked with.
I appreciate you putting this stuff out there, and Scott too, just for everyone else in the group. I mean, Scott talking about mental health publicly helped me ask for help the first time. And that's what, brought me to these groups. So I think the more things and events and education that there is out there and more people talking about it, it normalizes it. And I appreciate you guys, bringing up the conversation and making space for it. And just, as you said about allies, a lot of times those allies might not be within your own company, and you might need to find people outside of the company for support. And I encourage anyone to, come to groups like these for that type of thing. So I appreciate both of you making this space for this.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. One thing I will say too, I don't know if there's any sales leaders on this call, but I think one of the most important things to be mindful of as a sales leader is there's really a vulnerability paradox that exists within sales. And what I mean by a vulnerability paradox is we saw how important that was in terms of mental health and sales performance in that one slide. And the best way to understand this paradox is by asking one simple question, which is, how likely are you to be vulnerable with someone who's measuring your performance on a daily basis? And the answer is absolutely not. Am I going to be vulnerable with that person? There's no way I'm going to be vulnerable with someone who's measuring every single thing that I'm doing on a daily basis. So sales leaders have to be mindful of this and have to be aware of this. And they need to be aware the best way to kind of counter that paradox from taking place is really start by leading first. You need to be the ones that open up to start sharing. I've yet to meet a sales leader that hasn't had a struggle or a battle with their mental health at some point, whether it's a sleepless night or a really tough month where they were really stressed out. It's up to them to start sharing on a regular basis about how they're doing, so that they can start to build that trust and make themselves more approachable to the people on their team. So when their team's struggling, that paradox will be less impactful and they'll feel more comfortable having those more emotional conversations, more supportive conversations, I'd say.
I got a truckload of questions teed up for you, Jeff. Ready?
Oh boy. Let's do it.
Can you drink of water real quick?
Yeah. Let me grab some water real quick.
All right, let's go to Kelsey, who had two-part question.
Two-part. Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
Yeah, not bad. How are you?
Doing good. So my first part of my question was, I think I struggle a lot with hitting burnout very quickly. And that's just because I don't think that I action well. So I'm curious how you would proactively combat burnout as opposed to reactively, which usually gets to the point where I'm already burnt out and I'm having to take more time to heal it. So I'm curious how you would do that.
Yeah. So burnout is a challenging one because it starts to impact so many different aspects of our life. I think the main things that I would say, like, start with are, there's kind of like three basic things that we always want to look at. Is like, how are you sleeping? What are you eating? And how are you exercising? And really doing a basic check in there. Another framework to start thinking about on a daily basis that's so helpful to me is it's called a HALT framework. And HALT essentially stands for, are you hungry? A stands for, are you angry or experiencing another difficult emotion? Are you lonely? And are you tired? So HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And I literally HALT 15 times a day throughout the day, because I know if any of those basic buckets are running on empty, that I'm being more reactive to the stresses that I'm facing on a regular basis. So something you might want to try doing is just have a calendar set up during the day, like every hour, 5 minutes, every hour, just put a little reminder that says, HALT, are these buckets running on empty? And the most important thing when it comes to mental health, what I call like the golden rule, and this is what was shared by what's his name, Rich Roll, is mood follows behavior. Is an absolutely critical rule to embrace on a daily basis. Is you can't change your mood, or you can't think your way into a new mood. You can only action your way into your mood. By changing your behavior, you can change your mood. And that HALT framework really helps with that action that you can take, because if you're hungry, you can go eat something. If you're angry, you can journal and start working through those emotions, through those kind of experiences. You might even think about kind of speaking to a therapist, just talking to a close friend. If you're lonely, you'd call a close friend, meet up with someone to have coffee. If you're tired, make sure you prioritize sleep and get to bed earlier. Again, using something like a Whoop as well might provide really actionable data on a regular basis that you can start trying too. But yeah, it's just kind of building in those little check-ins throughout the day that can really help you kind of manage yourself more effectively, rather than reaching to the far end.
No, that's actually really helpful. I've never heard of HALT before. So I guess this kind of ties into the second part, which you've touched on a little bit, which I was thinking a lot about vulnerability versus like sharing at work. Like I'd say that I'm open, but I wouldn't say that I like to be vulnerable with people at work, because I think from historical situations, it's either put a target on my back or it just doesn't end well with leadership. So you kind of mentioned it before, which was like, your leaders also have to be being open and talking about what they're going through with you, so that you can feel like there's a safety net for you to do the same. But how would you, because I also think not being vulnerable plays into my burnout if I'm going through things I can't talk about. So how would you see openness versus vulnerability in work, and how that can affect your mental health positively or negatively?
Yeah,
like overall relationship.
Yeah, I think if you don't have any place to talk about what you're feeling and what you're going through with the leader, it's really important to find those avenues elsewhere. And I think it's Brené Brown that talks about a 4 squared. I think she called the 4 squared list, where it's just having a little piece of paper that's really, really tiny. You don't have to be open and vulnerable with every single person that you speak to on a daily basis, but you should always have a very small list of 3 to 4 people, hopefully a few of them are friends internally, that you can say, hey, do you want to be on my 4 squared list? Like when we're having a really bad day, let's make sure that we can be allies and talk to each other. No judgment, nothing. We're there. So really kind of having that list at hand, so you know who you can go to, who you can trust on a regular basis. Building off of that, she also has a really good framework that you might want to try and capture in the chat, that's called the Braving framework. This helps you identify who you trust. I think a lot of us, know we either trust some people and we don't trust other people, and we don't really know why we trust or don't trust someone. So the way she breaks it down is she calls it the Braving framework. So B stands for they respect our boundaries. R stands for they are reliable. So they things like showing up on time, and they're accountable to what they say, what they do. V stands for vault. So they're a vault. You can tell them something and they're not going to start spreading it elsewhere. I stands for they operate with integrity. So they tell the truth. N is they're non-judgmental, and G is they're generous. So I've used this over times, and I'm like, man, I just don't trust this person. And if I go through and do that kind of little check, that little breakdown, I'm like, oh, that's why I don't trust them, because they're not really reliable, or they're not respecting my boundaries. And it's very, very easy to see who you can trust and don't trust.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brent, you're up next. Brent Cole.
Thanks, Scott. Jeff, great session tonight. Thanks for having us all on here. It's awesome to learn. I'm curious, earlier on you said like mental health days, you see them as potentially like reactive, or you're not a big fan of them. And I'm just curious. So the organization I work at, we know sales is pushing hard at like the end of the quarter. Who isn't when you're in sales? Mm-hmm. So we know the first Friday at the end of the quarter, we're off. And we all know it's coming. So like some people plan long weekends. Some people don't open their laptop. Like it's an extra long weekend, no PTO. Do you see that as a problem, or like, do you think that's kind of a solution if you know that time off is coming and then people do with it as they please, knowing they have a long weekend?
Yeah, no, like don't get me wrong. I'm not like I'm not saying there's no benefit in wellness days. There absolutely are. And I think you're absolutely right. When they are structured into the day and teams know to expect that they have an extra long recovery period, that's amazing. that's fully built, that fully agree with that. In my ideal situation, I'd love to hear maybe your thoughts on this, Scott. The way I'd kind of like to structure a sales team, if I could go back and be a sales leader or support a sales leader from the ground up, is I'd want to build quotas and build months like a marathon runner training for a race. So my girlfriend's a marathon runner, and the way she trains is first week she'll run 12K or 12 miles, we'll say, because a lot of people in America, they'll run 12 miles, then she'll taper back and run 10. Then after that, she'll run 15, she'll taper back and run 12. Then she'll run 18 and taper back and run 15. So it's this tapering up of gas month, down month, gas month. So it goes up like this, as opposed to it's constantly going up like this. That way you can essentially build into your sales team this really nice balance between rest and recovery and essentially game days. Think about how hyped up teams could get around future months coming up where it's like, oh, it's game day. All of the incentives, all of the conversations around getting you ready around metrics. And then the next month is a recovery month. It's not saying you take your foot totally off the gas, but all of the kind of sales competitions and conversations around resting, recovering, resetting, getting that bounce back, because you're absolutely right. Stress is not inherently bad. It's when we go past the point of good stress into a point of distress, when those mental mistakes start to take place. So I think that's great that your organization is doing that. And I'm all for it if it's structured and built in to allow teams to say, this is when you should push. We have a long recovery to make up for it.
It's awesome. Thanks.
All right, Carolyn.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks. I kind of have a two-part question as well. The first part is, do you think that the great resignation, if you will, that's, being deemed in social media is tied to people's burnout rates more than their opportunities to find, a better job or a better life?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So my perspective on this great resignation or people taking sales sabbaticals, all of these good things is it really comes down to a massive group of people. The workforce has been relying primarily on willpower to get themselves through the pandemic and through this change. And the problem with willpower is it's not designed to be used for an infinite amount of time. And the way you can think about some willpower is like an elastic band. And you think about someone who's on a diet, for example, who's using willpower to stay on that diet. And they're walking down the grocery store line and they're saying, I can't have that, I can't have that, I can't have that. And they continue to go through the day, through the weeks, I can't have that, I can't have that. Throughout their mind is I can't have, until all of a sudden that elastic band breaks and they have a cheat day and they snap back to where the point starts. And I think that's what we're seeing with the great resignation, is this snap back. It's going past the point where 2-week vacations are not good enough. We're snapping way back to offload that stress because a lot of us have been relying on willpower to get us through all of this massive change that we've gone through. The people that I've seen thrive and do the best throughout this crazy, crazy times are the people that have seen this as a massive opportunity, that have said, I'm not going to focus on what I can't do. I see this as, look, like the world is moving at 30% right now. This is a massive, massive opportunity where I can do something. And how do I maximize this time? And they've been able to reinvest and turn away from I can't, which is heavily focused on willpower, to what can I do right now? So what now? What can I control? And that's been a great way to kind of navigate it. So that's my perspective. Whether that's, applies to the masses, I don't know, but I think that rubber band is that we see with crash dieting and everything is a very good example of what's happening right now.
That's incredible perspective. Thank you. The second part of my question was because I'm seeing a lot of my friends and former coworkers kind of just jump ship because the opportunities are there, but they're jumping into organizations that have a similar, the same, or in sometimes even worse cultures than what they left. And I worry about their mental health longer term as they see that as the big fix, only to have gone somewhere that's going to drag them right back down or snap further back on the
Mhm.
elastic band scale than where they started.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you're right. There's probably a lot of soul searching going on and a lot of people making reactive decisions. And it's really like there's really kind of two internal forces, two internal parts of our brain are focusing on desire for safety and comfort. And the one that's really been kind of brought to front and center with the pandemic is this desire to matter. By the end of our life, we want to get to a point that says, we were here and we mattered. Whatever that is, we want to be able to say that that's what makes human beings so unique, is we have this deep seated desire to matter and make a difference in the world. And I think you're right. A lot of people have started to become in search of what is that mattering instinct? What is going to make us matter? And I think one of the most powerful questions that I can offer that you share with your friends is, we ask this question growing up, and I don't know why we stopped asking it, which is, who do you want to be? Who do we want to be when we grow up? And as kids, we all started saying, I want to be doctors. I want to be athletes. I want to do these things. And we had this idea of this future self that we wanted to become. And for whatever reason, when we get to our 20s, we stop asking that question of who do we want to be when we grow up? And it starts getting into, I'm on the hamster wheel. I'm trying to advance my career. But it's a really powerful question to say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whether you're 25 or whether you're 70, like, who do you want to be when you grow up? And it's a really great way to think about your future self and think about who you want to be, and then start working backwards. If you think about that future self, what's one small action that they would start doing tomorrow if they were in your shoes? What's one behavior that they would implement? One habit, whether it's get up 30 minutes early, whether it's start investing into meditation, whether it's having those difficult conversations. What does that future self want to be that you're trying to be? What would they start doing tomorrow? And use that as kind of your North Star to help drive you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thanks, Carolyn. Vicky, can you take yourself off mute? You got a question?
Yes, thank you. So my question is, once you're already there, how do you recover from burnout? And is there any statistic of how long it usually takes?
Yeah, it's very different for everyone. Like, it's very dependent on the individual and the severity. If you feel like you're feeling like in that stage of you are very burnt out, that's where I think it's always really important to speak to your doctor or explore therapy. Those are really great strategies to help you or really great people to speak to about this. I think I need to be careful for myself to say, look, like, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in burnout. I know there are things that I've learned to help me kind of manage my burnout, manage my mental health on a day-to-day basis. But when things start to creep into mental illness, really severe anxiety, really severe depression, really severe burnout, it's really important to acknowledge that, hey, it's okay to need some help. I can share some resources with you. I think there's a great company called Ink Block Therapy. They're based in Toronto, actually, but they connect you to, I think BetterHelp is another one. They can connect you to an expert, a therapist or a burnout expert that can help kind of coach you and provide you really actionable next steps to work through it. So yeah, like it's really different for everyone. I don't think there's a specific stat around here's how long it takes. Like a broken bone takes X amount of weeks to heal. But if you are really feeling it, I'd definitely recommend exploring some of those options. Like I said, like BetterHelp or Ink Block Therapy would be good ones too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any last questions for Jeff from anybody? Did I miss anybody in the chat? Jacqueline has another one.
I have a question, another one, clearly. Jeff, this has been amazing. I would like to know, I work for LinkedIn and they do mental health day, meeting day. They do all of the bells and whistles that you're talking about that I absolutely identify with you. Like, I'm just going to get fucked up on this day because I have it off and that's how I'm going to celebrate myself. So I totally, sorry guys, being vulnerable. I totally, understand where you're coming from. I wanted to know, have you ever heard of a company called Glint? Does that ever come across your radar? Because they implemented that as a way to not just send out survey monkeys to see how people are feeling, but to actually take action with what people are implementing. So other than us just having like a one-on-one with our manager and talking about our mental health, I want to know if that ever came across your Rolodex, if you ever heard of it or saw any like success with that, if you did.
So I haven't heard about Glint. What do they do exactly?
It's like Survey Monkey on crack. I shouldn't sell it because I'm terrible at describing it, but it's like competes with like Culture Amp. It just like this sends out surveys about, did you like this? Was it helpful? How are you doing? And then tells the managers or whoever's receiving it how to actually put action to the responses in that survey versus just letting it, kind of, okay, here's my feedback and then doing nothing with it.
Yeah, so I haven't heard about Glint specifically. I think that there's a lot of companies right now doing engagement surveys, but a lot of the engagement surveys around problem identification, which is like brutal. It's like thinking about things like would you recommend this company to a team, like measuring things like burnout. It's more like, what can we actually start doing? So that's where I tell them to kind of start asking about some of those needs so that we can start filling those buckets. I don't know if you've heard of this really cool company called Leon. Leon is awesome. They have just launched their product and they're really focused on essentially predictive burnout analytics. So they're focused on getting analytics, ongoing well-being surveys on a weekly basis, anonymized, providing actionable feedback to the team, to the leader that says, hey, here's how your team is doing on a daily basis. And here are a couple actions or playbooks you can use to start making measurable improvements based on how your team is doing. Oh, your team is thriving this week. This is a team that you can push harder. And this is a team that's struggling that you really need to prioritize different activities. So we measure every single thing in sales, whether it's, calls being made, length of sales cycle, total revenue closed. And we think that we have these leading and lagging indicators covering our sales pipeline. But in reality, they're both lagging indicators. They're both measuring the output of the rep. And the evolution of sales that needs to take place is we need to get to a place where the well-being, are we sleeping right? How anxious are we? We need to start measuring the input of the rep on a regular basis. And Burna and a company like Leon is really starting to do that, which is really helpful.
Have you heard, Leon, I just read that, have you heard of Lyra? Because that is something that is the best. I don't care about the benefits or the health insurance. That's something that LinkedIn offers. You get 25 free therapy sessions, and I can extend that to my partner who doesn't even have to be a dependent. And I find that is like the best benefit I've ever come across in 10 years is being able to do, whether it's couples counseling or regular therapy for yourself, you get 25 free sessions. And it just sounds similar to Leon. So I just wasn't sure if you've ever heard of Lyra, which is Lyra.
I have heard of Lyra. I haven't spoken to anyone there, but yeah, that sounds like an amazing benefit that they're offering, which is.
If anyone's
amazing.
A sales manager in here, look into that because it is arguably like one of the best things that's made me feel valued at a company. So I don't know, just throwing that out there.
Love it.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Catherine, might be maybe our last question of the night before we let Jeff wrap up.
Okay. Hey, Jeff. Nice seeing you.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. I have a quick question. So as a manager, right, you get your feedback, you're meeting with your team, you know that some might be struggling, some might need, some support, flexibility, but your boss keeps on, pushing for results, keeps on pushing for detach from that personal portion of it, or that human interaction, and focus on results. I hear them, they're not doing well, they're going through a personal challenge, whatever it is, but we are running a business here, we need to deliver, blah blah blah. What would you say is the best approach to handle that conversation? Because also sharing too many details of what your team has shared, I find it to be a little bit of invasion of privacy somehow, right? Like they are trusting you. They are telling you certain things that are not working out. They expect obviously that conversation to kind of stay there. But you also have to manage those expectations up and handle that conversation. What, to your, kind of experience and knowledge, how to navigate that structure there?
Yeah, so I think I think it's absolutely critical for a frontline sales leader and a frontline sales manager. I think their number one priority is protecting their team and protecting what their teammates share with them. They need to be like an ally, because if that trust and that kind of vulnerability is team members feels like it's exposed or shared with people and puts them at risk, like you're going to lose that psychological safety. So I think the number one goal of any manager is to make sure your team feels safe and keeps that protective, regardless of what's happening above you. You really need to make sure that you're building that trust and keeping them safe and not sharing that. So I think that'd be kind of my first point to that. I don't have like a great answer, because it is really, really difficult. But I think from a manager's standpoint, I think it's approaching it from the perspective that, like, I don't think people are inherently, you need to really assume positive intent with every single person on your team. You can't really, as soon as you start to slip into the mindset of someone on your team is lazy, or they're not cut out for sales, or they're a bad person, you're going to lose that trust, and you're going to have a really tough time identifying that problem. And you really need to remain curious and compassionate to that person on your team that's struggling with burnout, and go to them and start sharing, like start kind of like sharing more openly with them to say, hey, I know you've had a couple tough months. Like, when I've been in this experience in the past, I started to have panic attacks. I wasn't sleeping right. Here's what was going on in my life. And I don't know if that's happening to you, and don't feel like you need to share, but just know that I'm here to support you, because I get it. I've been there, and I'm willing to work through it. Don't worry about what's going on outside of sales. Like, you're my number one priority. You come first. So I think it's more about managing that internal dynamic and really doubling down on being compassionate, being empathetic, and being curious about what's going on with those people on your team that are struggling, and worrying less about the metrics or the quotas, or like, honestly, like, who the fuck cares? Like, you're dealing with real people here that need help. And it's like, that's got to be your number one priority, is like putting those people first and remaining curious and empathetic, because as soon as you lose that, it's game over for the entire team.
Thank you.
Awesome. Jeff, do you want to leave us with any closing remarks? We really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. And hopefully everybody gets a chance to connect with Jeff on LinkedIn, follow his work, and check out the Sales Health Alliance.
Yeah. Like, I guess I can do a little plug. I just released a book. I think part of consistency is having these conversations is having consistency, having these conversations on a consistent basis. So I created a book to help sales teams and salespeople have more ongoing conversations. So you can grab that. I've also put together various training programs and playbooks to help salespeople. But more importantly, I built Sales Health Alliance to be a resource first and a business second. So that means there's over 100 pieces of free content, whether it's articles around anxiety, around mindset, around, navigating these crazy times. They're all up there. They're all free on the website. So check them out, because, like I said, resource first, business second is how I've wanted to build this business. And I just don't think enough people know about it yet. So share it around, and hopefully we can.
Everybody here help Jeff spread the word. Jeff, I'll hit you up and get a link to your book, and I'll share it with the group. So
yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Amazing.
All right, everybody. Appreciate everybody spending some time with us. Have a good rest of the week. Big thanks to Jeff. Talk soon.
See ya.